go. Okay. Okay. Okay, so we aren't gonna ask for Brzezinski, Mr. Brzezinski and Mr. Witherspoon are absent. As soon as she talks, we'll see her face, I guess. That's what he said.
Up there? Go sit at Teresa's. Go sit at Teresa's.
Yeah, do you guys, I mean, after this is over, we're only doing one thing of business and then you're on, your study session. I don't know where the consultants are, but they're out there somewhere. Don't forget, when you're green, you're on live, and if you, on your mic, if you wanna mute yourself, you have to turn that off.
So we're all off.
I see green on mine.
Green, you're on. If you're not green, you're not talking. If you're not green, you're not on. Yep, hold on, I'll fix that.
So I have to time them too. Bear with me. I have only new stuff. I never have anything that used to be done. Everything I do is new now.
Testing. We will start in 1 minute.
I have a lot of stuff for people to see. Oh, there we are. Tell me when to go, Frank. Are we going?
Okay, Lori, whenever you're ready.
Roll call for the city council session of Wednesday, June 24th, 2021 at 5:30 p.m. Mr. Keys, Ms. Allen, Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Schaaf, Mr. Winarski. Mr. Witherspoon and Mr. Brzezinski are absent. Okay, Pledge of Allegiance.
We're going to have a minute of a moment of silence, and then we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So make sure you speak directly into your microphone as well, please. Absolutely, this one.
Okay, this is a little bit unusual, but we have two items on the agenda tonight. We have the final approval of the bond refinancing for sewers. And if anybody has any public comment regarding the bond, citizens can be heard now. Anyone wants to speak about the sewer refinance bond? Okay.
Lori, just so you're aware,
Lori,
those of us on Zoom can't hear
I
anything.
think you said you'd have to take public comment over
I asked.
either, either subject matter.
Oh, he told me just on,
Oh, that's what it said earlier, the solicitor, so. Just
okay.
ask.
Can Ed answer the question? Are we taking public comment on the sewer?
Are you able to hear me?
No, sir. No, Ed, we can't hear you.
We can hear you, Ed, but we can't hear Council Chambers. We can hear Liz.
Okay. If council can hear me, I'm going to try to yell. You're done with public comment. That's the only action you're going to be taking tonight. You're good.
Huh. No, the meeting is really to present the.
Amount not to exceed $30,285,000 sewer revenue bonds, series of 2021, and setting forth the amount, interest rates, and maturity dates of the bonds, authorizing the authority to proceed with the plan of financing, authorizing the execution and delivery of a lease agreement, and the incurrence of lease rental debt thereby, authorizing the specified officers of the City of Erie to prepare and certify the debt statement, and to do all other acts necessary to carry out the provisions of the ordinance, setting forth the payment of the sewer revenue bonds and the source of such payments, repealing all inconsistent ordinances, and providing that the ordinance is effective immediately. Council File Ordinance Bill Number 16235, and now known as Official File Ordinance 36/2021, be finally passed by City Council. Mr. Keys, Ms. Allen, Mr. Brennan, Mrs. Schaaf, Mr. Winarski. City Council passed Official File Ordinance 36/2021, finally by yeas 4, nays 0. 5. 5 yeas, nays 0. Okay, this concludes our business, so you can go right into the stormwater study session.
Okay, Department of Public Works, you're on.
Oh, there's my 5.
I don't know if you have them connected, Frank, wherever you're, but tonight, for the first time, we're going to have a discussion on stormwater. I don't think we've ever had a discussion on stormwater with City Council. But back in 2019, we contracted with Wood Engineering to do a stormwater study for the city, with checking in the feasibility of, or the possibility of a stormwater fee. Tonight, Wood Engineering is here to go over their report, their recommendations, and that's about it, and then be open to questions after that. So if Wood Engineering is on, we can begin. Well, until she comes on, I can give you some information about stormwater sewer system. We have over 500 miles of storm sewers in the city. That's about here to New York City. And there go any from range in sizes from 8-inch to the Mill Creek tube, which is 18 by 22. And that's a 2-mile tube in the middle of the city. And we have all the sewers discharge either in Presque Isle Bay or Lake Erie. Some of the sewers are combined sewers, so the storm sewer does discharge in Lake Erie, but via the sewer treatment plant, it gets treatment and gets discharged. We're also under a permit with the DEP for it's called the MS4 Municipal Separate storm sewer system. That's the MS4. And it's a permit that it started back in the early 2000s. It's a 5-year permits. And we're in the midst of we have one submitted right now. We haven't been approved yet. But what's been happening with the DEP is that each successive 5-year increment, they get a little more stringent. They add a few more items to what they're requiring us to do. And it's all on best management practices to make sure that the water we discharge into Presque Isle Bay and Lake Erie is clean. And what they've said, what we have now is we have a sedimentation issue, which all urban areas do. You know, all the dirt from the street when it rains gets put into the storm sewer and it gets washed out into the lake. And so what their efforts are the theory is through best management practices, the water that's discharged into the lake, into the bay, will have less and less sediment in it, and therefore less effect on the plant life and the fish, the whole ecosystem that's there now. In order to do that, because we have more and more stringent requirements from the DEP, it's costing the city more money and to comply with what those requirements are. We've done okay up to now, but we're getting to the point where the costs are going to start outweighing what we have available and the manpower. So I think they're here. Are they here? All right. Without further ado, Wood Engineering.
So I have a question. Can you actually hear me? Because we can't hear you. I'm not sure what that means, not to have gotten a response.
I think all of us on Zoom can hear you. I don't know if they can hear us in council chambers.
This is
think
Ed
that's
Betza. I'm on Zoom. I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm on Zoom too, Joe Schember, and but I can't hear council chambers, and they evidently can't hear us.
That makes it a bit difficult.
Yeah, I tried going on. Where'd they go?
Mr. Mayor.
I tried going on YouTube, and I couldn't hear it there either.
Mr. Mayor, we can hear you in council chambers, and I don't know what the issue is on your end, but I can hear it on my phone. So possibly headphones. I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm trying to work it on my end.
We can't hear you very well either. Something's wrong with the audio from council chambers. Every microphone sounds the same.
Check. Can you hear me now?
This is Ed Betza. It's very faint, but if you're able to hear the speaker, you can just let the speaker put on their presentation. And then if there's follow-up questions, we may need to do it a different way, but at least they could put on their presentation.
If the speaker would like to try, I'm willing if council agrees.
Yeah, maybe just speak up as best you can, because I could hear her, but it just wasn't, it was a little
If
bit
you
faint.
can speak up as loud as you can, as we will do also.
Okay, well, I have my audio controls on maximum, so I'm hoping that you can hear me.
I can hear you fine. Yeah, because you're not in council chambers.
I know all of my Zoom friends can hear me. But we want to make sure everyone in council chambers can hear. So I'm going to proceed through the presentation. Dave, I believe what you did was some introduction to the topic. So if I'm duplicating anything Dave said, I apologize, but let me go ahead and get started through the presentation. The summary of the information we want to provide really is to set the background, why stormwater is as serious as it is, what the challenges are that are facing the city, how we looked at the funding options. Ultimately, the analysis of the potential for establishing user fees, final rate estimations, those kinds of things. So I'm going to just march right on, assuming that you can hear what I'm about to say. So to set the background, we have seen sorry, that went really fast. We've seen stormwater management goals change over time. Early days of managing runoff from property driven by the development and density of property development has been based on protecting property, protecting human health, basically to make sure that we are getting water off properties down into the natural system as fast as we can. That was in place philosophically, operationally from our engineering process until EPA and the Clean Water Act was established in the early 1970s. In that set of regulations was the mandate to address the quality, the pollutant loading from a variety of sources. Stormwater was one of them. And with that, the regulations ultimately were issued after amendments to the Clean Water Act were passed in 1987. And in 1990, the mandate for local governments to take responsibility for controlling pollutants was introduced and wrapped into a set of permits issued through the authority of EPA, but actually handled by the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection on their behalf. And that changed, boy, my slides are just jumping around here. That changed the way we looked at stormwater across the United States in literally thousands and thousands of communities. The philosophy of managing stormwater went from getting it off the property into a pipe, into a receiving stream as soon as we can when rainfall is occurring, to wait a minute, let's stop it before it is discharged. Let's make sure it's as clean as it can be as it moves across hardened surfaces, rooftops, parking lots, industrial facilities, institutions, whatever the land purpose is, to first take a step to say, and it needs to be clean. It needs to be only stormwater, not loaded with heavy metals, sediments, those kinds of things that are of concern, organics. And so the whole idea of adding these kinds of green treatments has evolved over the last 30 years since the first permits were issued in 1992. What you're currently faced with is a permit that requires you to comply with fairly significant implementation standards and performance. But in addition, you have a drainage system that's aging. Every day it's going to get older. Its ability to carry the load that it was originally defined to handle may be constrained. You end up with nuisance flooding. You may end up with serious flooding over time. So maintenance becomes a critical piece of this story as well. And so we see stormwater as a practice in the services of local government become more and more complex. We took a look at the way stormwater from a drainage operations perspective, touches various units within the city's government structure. And you can see by just this schematic layout, there are lots of offices who are adding value around managing stormwater, whether it's from code enforcement to public works, to partnerships with organizations like the Conservation District, like Erie County. You have a complex set of activities that are being managed across multiple organizational units. I will tell you, this is typical. You are not unusual. This is, in fact, the way we see stormwater being managed all across the United States and Canada. We do work there as well. So when the city came to us, we instituted a process to build baseline information, to understand what's currently being delivered in services and how that is being funded, and to understand what challenges are in front of the city as you go forward, and what your expectations should be in addressing the demands for services that are really driven by the fact that you are a relatively compact and dense urbanized area. With that, we discussed with staff what approach to funding would be appropriate. We evaluated user fees and to establish direct charges for stormwater. To do that, we evaluated the data that's available in order to do cost allocation on the basis of a user fee, and ultimately establish some of the assumptions that we would use in recommendations and findings going forward. I believe Dave mentioned this, though it was difficult to hear the whole piece of what he was saying, but it is the presence of developed property that's driving the requirements under the Water Quality Act and your permit. We refer to it as an MS4. It's simply a moniker for a municipal separate storm sewer system. So rather than all those S's, it became an MS4. It's used that way, jargon in the industry. Again, a municipal separate storm sewer system. You're required to do reduction of pollutant loading, and every jurisdiction, and there are near 1,000 in the state of Pennsylvania, that have this permit must reduce pollutant loading in their current permit term. A part of that is that you're responsible to see that those kinds of facilities are on private property, are maintained and performing as they were intended. In doing so, one of the things we looked at was your staffing and the capability to be able to ensure compliance in this really complex set of services that are called compliance with a permit. And one of the things you're going to see us recommend to you is 2 new staff positions. Those positions are dedicated to ensuring the city remains and is able to face the compliance challenges in this permit that was just issued to you in 2018. And that you have a need for investment in the existing drainage network, simply to maintain that system over time. So what did we recommend to staff? We recommended that you need additional resources over and above what is currently being provided. You need to look at your capital program into the future and solve not only what you know is your current backlog, but recognize that the more you know about this system, the more you're going to find issues that are plaguing it. So when you have a system that's aging and aging all the time, and its useful life is starting to meet its end, you need to be prepared for that, both in maintenance and in your capital rehab program. And so one of the things we talked with staff about was establishing a capital reserve that would allow you to amass the funding necessary to start buying down a significant capital backlog. Again, recommended hiring additional staff to address the problems. Short-term focus, make sure you stay compliant and that you're able to meet the new terms in the 2018 permit. That new term requires you to invest in capital. It requires you to reduce sediment loading from your drainage network by 10%. Every jurisdiction, again, that holds this same permit is faced with the same mandate. You are not alone. jurisdictions across the state are facing this 10% sediment reduction intended to be in compliance by the end of your permit term. To do that, you need the resources. You need the capital money, and you need the staff that's dedicated to ensuring that this can be accomplished. Permit compliance has multiple components. So not only is this pollutant reduction required, not only are you required to inspect the private facilities to ensure that they are meeting the objectives of both your ordinance and Act 167 requirements, but you need to ensure that you have established appropriate funding for your capital program into the future. And so the mandate says 2023, you need to be in full compliance. You need resources to meet that. What are the consequences? The state and EPA can audit and fine you for noncompliance. I often get asked, does that ever happen? If you'd like to talk to someone who's dealt with it up close and personal, call your peers in Allentown. They faced an audit. They negotiated down from a couple of $100,000 fine to $50,000, but it was still a significant burden to be able to meet not only the corrective action order that came, but to pay that fine. Yes, you have that vulnerability. What are the chances? That I couldn't predict. If I had that crystal ball, I'd be out there selling my services all over the place. That would be some crystal ball, but I can't do that. What I can tell you is you get exposed to the vulnerability. And we want to be sure, as your consultant, that you're aware of the risk and that you address your compliance as you want to do and ensure that your community meets its obligations. The permit automatically requires public education and outreach. It requires you to go look for polluters. It requires you to make sure, again, private properties are managing effectively. It requires you as a business to make sure your house is in good order, that your public facilities that you own and operate are not polluters. And it requires you, in partnership with the conservation district, to make sure that construction sites are well managed. The private facility inspections, it is one of your targets for needing additional resources. You are to inspect not only your publicly owned facilities, but the private facilities. Again, it has a routine requirement. You must enforce if they are not meeting their requirements. You also have the obligation under the permit that if they choose not to actually do corrective action, you have an obligation to make sure that pollutant is not coming in to the public system. That means you could step in and make a repair. You could charge back the requirement as a part of enforcement, but you can't simply say, oh, well, I can't get them to comply. Absolutely, you need to be able to do that. And you need to train folks that are in the field to recognize pollutant sources, to recognize the potential that their own operation could pollute, and to make sure that they have eyes and ears focused on behalf of all of Public Works and engineering to make sure that you are aware of and are addressing concerns. When auditors come, they just want to drive through your city. They find something that looks like a violation to them, they will write it up and you'll have to explain either why it's not or what you did about it. So every permit cycle, every 5 years, you can expect this permit to get more difficult, not less. We've not seen EPA through the Pennsylvania DEP or in any other jurisdiction reduce their demands. So what was a very clear conclusion was that it's not about whether there are going to be cost impacts for this continued compliance, but it really is, how do you distribute those costs? How do you deal with that incremental increase that you need, and who should be involved in paying with it? So we looked at a revenue generation plan to make sure that your long-term needs are met. One of the principles that we heard very clearly from staff, and that we ourselves as your consultant really do invest and believe in, and that's fairness and equity is an important principle of who should be involved in paying for resources to meet these expectations. And so what is the link, again, to compliance? The link is impervious area. It's developed properties. If the city of Erie didn't exist, if there was no development along Lake Erie, Mother Nature would know what to do with this and would take care of it. Mother Nature is actually a whole lot better at balancing these things than we are. The minute population started to increase, as development density increases, demand is placed on the government to put a good drainage system out there. We don't want all this water on our property. We don't want our neighborhood flooded. We want you to take it and get rid of it. And that's how we expanded the services of maintaining underground as well as above ground components of the drainage system. Then the government, federal government, through Pennsylvania DEP said, yep, but you gotta make sure it's clean. So everyone who owns impervious property has a responsibility to help. And in helping, the link to a user fee, historically, over the last 40 plus years that utilities have been established for stormwater, has been impervious area. And we'll talk about how we analyze that link. So we took your current services, we looked at those, we looked at the cost of adding an additional person as a manager to oversee your permit and as an inspector. We looked at the cost of complying with the permit construction requirements, as well as to establish an initial investment fund to do long-range capital programs. The estimate that we're working with right now starts out around $1.5 million as a new cost need. This represents new investment. This represents new problem solving. It grows over time by about $100,000 in a 5-year period of analysis. You'll see under the capital and operating reserve that that number is variable, number one. And number two, that it looks like all you're doing is socking money away. And that's not intended for what this represents. This is a forecast that allows staff to begin to prioritize and use these funds. So though it says it's a reserve, as Public Works identifies repairs that need to be made, that money would be moved right up to immediate capital costs. So it's not intended that you're simply building a fund. It is intended that there's a forecast of need and that you'll use these funds as they come in through the program as priorities are set, as solutions are prioritized, as investments and construction can occur. We took all of those costs and ran it through a model, and no, I don't expect you to read all these numbers. I want you to be comfortable that we took into consideration all kinds of things working with your finance staff. We looked at the potential for bad debt. We looked at a credit program, and I'm going to talk about a credit program in just a few minutes. We looked at other revenues and potential interest earnings. We made sure that to establish this fund, it's not merely saying, oh, what's the person's salary? it's saying there is a whole complement of financial factors that to ensure the revenues are sufficient, that they will meet the test of those revenue demands, that we run them through working with your finance staff, a model that will predict the appropriate cash intake in order to address all of those component pieces. So I just mentioned credits. So what are credits? Stormwater utilities from the early days up to the thousands that exist today recognize that private property investment in drainage is a benefit to the demand that's placed on the city for its system to perform. And recognizing that that private property investment is a critical partnership. Because if no one had invested, all of the water generated would simply be in the hands of the city to have to take care of. So there are partners that have already invested or who may be willing to invest on their property, help reduce the pollutant load, help control velocity, volume, meet your design criteria, that should be recognized partners, and through a credit program, their financial charges can be reduced to address and recognize that they are placing less demand on the public system than perhaps the property next door that has not made those same investments. And so credits become important. And how do you establish them? I can assure you a basic principle that we encourage is make it as simple and straightforward as possible. Simple doesn't mean easy. Simple means it's understandable, it can be measured, it can be enforced, it can be inspected, but it's a process that everyone can figure out and work themselves through. So what should be eligible? We're going to talk a little bit more about that, but some of the things that we see communities encourage is voluntary investment on private property. And that those who initiate voluntarily to make an investment are given a higher value to the community than those who only spend because it's a requirement if they want to develop the property. Another one that's often encouraged is redevelopment, where you have a core older community that is unable to address pollutants in a manner that is less costly per pound removed. It's to encourage through redevelopment. And so there are strategies to do that. Another issue that comes up is some of your industry, some of your community members may already hold a very similar permit that you hold from DEP on water quality. Communities typically evaluate whether the fact that those controls are in place are assisting in your loading factors. And some communities acknowledge that as a credit. So pollution prevention activities can be done site by site, small footprint, but often we see credit programs are not established on the basis of someone putting in a rain barrel. There are other ways to encourage that kind of single homeowner responsibility, but trying to do that through a financial credit, and when you see the numbers, I think you'll see why. It can be more of an overhead burden than it really adds value to the overall program. So we're going to answer through examples some of these questions. What's eligible? How much should it be? What do you do about certain kinds of unique properties? What should the application, renewal process, all of these things that ultimately lead to building a credit program. So what can be eligible? Two widely recognized criteria is that it's built to an established standard. So it's a physical facility. There are in place standards that have to be met. and that the facility can meet those standards. And number two, that it has to be maintained on a continuing basis. So it's not a matter of saying, oh, look, I raised my hand, I have this facility, give me my credit, but never maintain it. And over time, failure starts to occur. It's not only not contributing in the way that it should, but it actually can be a burden to the public system. So making sure that it's meeting some recognized standards and that there is ongoing commitment to maintain two typical eligibility criteria. Maintenance is often enforced through a written agreement. You have those kinds of agreements in place in the city. It's to ensure, again, the city knows what maintenance needs to occur, so does the owner of the property, and that maintenance is verifiable. Then to make sure that it's meeting objectives of the city, it's linked to the criteria for the purpose of the fee in the first place. So in this case, the initiative of the fee is for those services above what's currently delivered by the city, and it's really focused in the short term around water quality. I don't expect you to read this. I only want to emphasize that this is the kind of component requirement decision-making that we work a community through. What are those technical standards? What should the maintenance agreement require? And how do you verify that the credit is legitimate? Because recognize again, not everybody can qualify for a credit. So those rate payers under a user fee that can't qualify want to make sure you're not just giving away money, but that you're doing this in a very responsible way. So how much of a credit is given? What do we typically even see in the industry? And it varies all over the place. It is common to find that there is a cap on the percent of the fee that can be established for credit. So various technical standards are met. This particular one is a 20% credit. This particular one is a 10% credit. This particular one is a 15% credit, whatever it might be. But that in total, they can't exceed a certain value. The reason for establishing a cap is that regardless of whether those facilities are in place, the city must continue to deliver other kinds of services under the utility structure. So it's not a free ride. It's a recognized contribution, but also a recognized responsibility that the revenues have to still meet certain expectations. It's usually quantitatively focused. So whether it's quantitative on a pollutant reduction level, quantitative on flow, velocity, there's usually some recognizable quantitative component. And then it's not uncommon to find that there's a qualitative component. And so we have lots of experience. We've written these all over the United States and Canada. Happy to work through what that policy ought to look like. So potential goals: recognize benefits of structures and investments on private property. That's a critical goal. Make distinctions between each one based on the benefit that it provides to the program. You may want to incentivize partnerships. Perhaps there's a solution you need to put in place. You need the private property, but you have the funds. An incentive to bring a private partner to the table and how you might partner with taking a direct engagement. I'm willing to have this facility on my property, but you, city, you're the one who needs to pay for it and maintain it. Those kinds of things are important, and we see lots of communities engaged in that. And again, it needs to be simple to understand. It does not mean it's not rigorous. It just needs to be understandable. So we work through the utility concepts with staff. We identify where all of your basic operations occur, what is done, and what who is responsible for it. A utility in stormwater does not have to be an administrative separate organization, put a bunch of overhead in place, that kind of thing. There are jurisdictions who do that, who've established authorities for their stormwater, like they have perhaps for their solid waste or for their sanitary or water systems. It is not a mandated requirement. There is no requirements that say that that's the only way it can be done. There are authorities granted through legislation. For some communities of certain classes, yes, an authority is actually mandated. But based on the city and your structure, that is not a requirement going forward. But it is a process for ensuring that efficiency of operation and expenditure of funds is taking place. It's trackable. You know what the revenue is coming in. You know what the revenue is being used for. It can be reported out. You understand what you're attempting to accomplish. Again, stormwater utilities started in the early 70s with the Clean Water Act, with the recognition that drainage is a major infrastructure in any urbanized community. It is of significant value. It needs to be maintained. It needs to have appropriate funding. And so we see it evolve over time to now where there literally are thousands of communities who have stormwater utilities. I had the personal pleasure and challenge of implementing one as a public works director when I was a public works director. And it can be transformational in empowering solutions to really become reality. So how are they calculated? Again, what's the tie? It's development. The tie is back to impervious area. We didn't have all this impervious area. Drainage demand for services would be quite different. And so the meter, just as we use a meter in water or sewer, we may use a meter in solid waste, such as size of container, number of containers allowed, but we're metering the service that will be delivered through some relationship to what is demand. Impervious area becomes the meter for stormwater. There are two approaches to billing that have been established as best practices in the industry. We're going to talk in detail about each one. One's called an equivalent residential unit, and one is called a fixed fee billing unit. So let's take a look at what those things are. Under an equivalent residential unit, all the parcels in the community are evaluated on their impervious area as if they were all residential. So to do that, we establish what the median value is for impervious area in the single family detached residential stock parcels in the community. For Erie, that happens to be 2,136 square feet of impervious area. Again, we're not talking about house size, we're talking about house, driveway, sidewalks on private property, a garage, those kinds of things are what add up to a total of impervious area per parcel. So in a case where you use the equivalency factor, you treat all the single family detached houses as one billing unit. All the other parcels are measured for impervious area, and you use basic math. The billing unit is 2,136 square feet. Here's an example, an 80,000 square foot development, building, parking, has a detention facility on it. You do the math, 2,136 into 80,000, you round up to the nearest whole number, 37 billing units. Under the fixed billing unit, you set a value per square foot. Now, the driver of doing this on a fixed square foot basis is having all the data on all the parcels. And that means having impervious area that you can calculate on every single parcel in the community that has impervious area. Erie is not in the position to do that at this time. And so the equivalent residential unit is the approach that we've discussed with staff. So under an ERU, single family homes, detached housing, 1 billing unit. All the others, again, it's math, 2,136 square feet gives us the number of billing units. One of the things that you'll see that, and none of these house images are from your community, these are just pictures I use, but you can see that there is variability as we look at single family housing. And Erie is absolutely no different. You have small, you have medium, you have large impervious area per lot in this category of parcels. We've discussed with staff using what's known as a tiered system. And for these properties, we have analyzed the distribution and recommend that you put them into 3 categories. This increases not only the perception, but the reality that this is more equitable. Larger areas of impervious pay a larger proportion. And so we have suggested using a half a billing unit in those parcels that are up to 1,200 square feet for their building. From 1,200 to 1,550 gets a billing unit. Above 51 or 1,551 is large. It gets a billing unit and a half. Again, show you how it happens on other properties. Here's a more business use facility. It has 3,345 square feet. Billing unit 2,136. We divide it out. It's 1.6 billing units. We round up to 2. So it'd be 2 billing units times the rate that's set by the city. Impervious area drives the number of billing units. And so one of the things that we do is really spend a lot of time evaluating data. We are working with the county to have the most up-to-date information that we can use. And in the process of the decision to go forward, we will continue to review and evaluate this data so that we do have the information necessary to allocate this fee on this basis. We're often asked, so tell us how this impacts the community. In the pie chart that you see at the top, this is a distribution of all your parcels by land use class. You'll see that gray is big, 84% residential. When you look at the others, it's broken into what are tax exempt, commercial, another category, industrial, and then utility. When we do the calculation for billing units, now you see the who pays shifts. Where residential property is at 84%, the percent of billing units based on impervious area drops to 39% of the cost for the billing units themselves. Commercial expands considerably, exempt from 6 to 20%. Why is this important? Because fees are paid by non-taxable properties. I want to make sure everyone's clear on that. Fees are paid by non-taxable properties. And then your industrial is around 10%. This takes the land use codes as we've gotten them on all your parcels and shows you how there is a shift in the cost burden when you go to a fee that is based on the demand for service measured by the meter of impervious area. This is a list, and this will be made available if it's not already, if I don't know the distribution of our presentation, of the parcels with the largest number of billing units. And when you get a chance to read through this, you're going to see a number of non-taxable properties listed here. One of the things that happened in the early 2011, 12, something in that range, Congress passed legislation on this particular fee and on all fees charged under the Clean Water Act, and mandated to its agencies that they will pay these fees. Now, there's one caveat in the bill. It's a very simple, straightforward piece of legislation, but there is one caveat. And the one caveat is the federal government will not be isolated and created as a separate special class of property. If the federal government is to be charged, so is the state government. So is the local governments in your community. So this is a very important statement. The post office happens to be one of your larger ratepayers. But if you choose to have the federal government as a payee, you must look at your policy regarding charging all governments, or by legislation, government properties do not have to pay. We then aggregated not only what the larger parcels are, but the owners of all those parcels. And again, when you see then in this list, you're going to see a lot of tax exempt properties. So why are fees for service attractive? Because the principle is everybody pays. Everybody starts with everybody pays. So say we looked at all of your residentials, wanted you to see the distribution of those in tiers. So that gray box you saw that would be residential charges, they are distributed relatively equally. You've got a little bit of a blimp in the mid of the payment by your single family residential properties using a tiered approach. Again, done typically for equity. This shows you the distribution of the tiers. So when you look at the parcels, you look at how they're divided up. So each one of the upper pie chart shows you tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, how they are by the number of parcels. And then the bottom shows you how they're distributed by the number of billing units. And so again, you see this shift away from small, from 34% of all your parcels to only 17% of tier 1 billing units. The tier 2 stays very close, and that's very typical. But the shift is that your larger impervious areas pay more. This reinforces that philosophy that those who have more impervious area pay more for charges. One of the things that is important is the establishment of the technical standards of the analysis that we did. So the question, a minimum threshold, the tools we have available to us for any of our utility work in stormwater are not precise enough for us to measure literally on a square foot basis. We don't have the technology available. If we had access to some spy satellites, we might be able to get down to that degree of refinement. We can't do that. And so we typically set a minimum billing unit so that the smallest amount of impervious area that will be billed is 500 square feet. Anything under that is not billed. So that's an important piece of understanding the power of the tools we have available and in understanding the way that the charges are distributed. So what does this rate look like? I showed you the kind of costs we're attempting to raise, ultimately about $1.7 million, taking into account all of the fiscal impacts. And so when we look at our rate analysis, a single billing unit is $24 per year. In the residential tiers, that would be 12, 24, and 36 a year. That would be their total charge. We were able to work with the analysis that you could hold that rate constant over the study period, unless, again, you have a major event, something that requires major capital investment, you might need to see this change. But the intent was, can we establish an approach that would be stable, predictable? People would know what was being asked of them for more than simply a short-term, one-time kind of charge. Do these go away? I've often been asked, can we stop charging? You could always stop charging, obviously, but if you're asking the question, will you ever be able to stop investing? That answer is no. Your drainage system is in need. Your drainage system will continue to age. Your needs for water quality protection are likely to increase over time. The condition not only of Lake Erie, but of your receiving streams will continue to be a focus for environmental protection. Are you out there doing this and like nobody else in the area is? Mill Creek is looking at this same thing. Mill Creek is at the point of having given this same kind of report to their elected body as well. But there are communities, and these are just a handful of communities in the state of Pennsylvania that are charging. Again, nationwide, it's in the thousands. But this is simply a sampling of how different rates are in place. One of the unique ones sitting here is the city of Allentown. Allentown established a rate per 500 square feet. They are not using the ERU methodology. They are using a per 500 square foot billing unit. They generate right around $5.6, $5.8 million in their community for their stormwater program at $20 per 500 square feet. 50%, a little over 50% or less of, from a who pays perspective of their single family homes, 50% or less pay $60 a year. So there's a group that's paying 20, there's a group paying 40, there's a group paying 60. The rest of the revenue is coming from larger single family homes, as well as all of their business, industry, universities, that kind of thing. As you can see, Radnor Township also put in tiers for their residential properties. One we just recently completed was Bethlehem. Theirs is now operational. They are billing, and theirs is $60 for a single family home. They're also using the ERU methodology. Ferguson's is unique in that they have zones of development. And so there are two different rates in Ferguson. One is for their denser growth area, urbanized area. The other is for the non-growth area, which is much more agricultural. And so the rates are $119 per year per billing for their single family homes and $75 in the non-growth area. We've looked at how are we going to carry this if the fee is adopted. There are various ways to bill this. The most popular, it really that we've seen frequently now in Pennsylvania is put it on the real property tax as a fee. Is that legitimate? Yes, it is. Can you collect under the same authorities? Yes, you can. You can put it on the water and sewer utility bill, but it comes with a greater administrative burden because utility bills are typically not property-based. It is not a charge that's property-based, it's user-based, and the user could have 5, 6, 10 meters on a property. And so, again, our meter is one thing, impervious area. It aligns beautifully to the real property tax, and we're talking with the city about that as the option. There would be some costs for getting it all implemented. There could be some ongoing cost for carrying it on the bill and collection, but that would certainly be included in the cost of the program. So where do we go from here? You've been very patient. Thank you. It's continued outreach education. It's working through policies like the credit policy. It's coordination if you're going to move forward on the billing system itself. It's finalizing ordinance adoption, the master account file for billing it out, training, customer service. Those are all the next steps should you make an affirmative decision to go forward. I'm going to stop talking. I feel like I've been running a mile a minute, but I realize a lot of time has passed. I know we had some technical issues getting started, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. I have my GIS team on the call as well. And though they're not listed as presenters, I'm sure there are ways that we could bring them in if there were any detailed questions around that as well. So I turn it back over to Dave and to the council.
Elizabeth, I have a question.
Sure.
I'm on Zoom, so I think you can hear me.
Yes, I can. Thanks.
I had a couple of questions. It strikes me that, you talk about, continued public education. It seems like that's something that we should probably do sooner rather than later. And I just want to tell you kind of some background. I used to work at the newspaper, and we had I actually was the one who edited, we had an environmental page every week. Now it's gone away. I mean, newspaper is now owned by a chain. I really thought that environmental page, which was designed for students, but was also read by adult readers, really did a good job in helping to educate the area audience about stormwater management. I mean, not in, public works kind of thing, but letting people know, hey, when that water, stormwater is contributing to, harmful algae blooms and those kinds of things. So I guess I would just suggest that somehow we start with a public education thing. I mean, I'm going to kind of be a tattletale on City Hall. There was a rain garden outside of City Hall. I don't think it's a rain garden anymore. It seems to me that we have an opportunity here to get ahead of this fee, to let people know about the environmental benefits. I also know, I noticed in some of those early examples you gave, green roof was one of the one of the examples you gave.
Mm-hmm.
And Mill Creek has actually been ahead in terms of green roofs. But when a school put a green roof on, there was like, oh my God, why are we doing this? From, a certain contingent. So it seems to me, as we do hopefully have development come back here, it would probably be good somehow to be working with developers to kind of get ahead of this too, put this into your planning. I'm thinking about, we had a discussion a couple of months ago about a developer who's building some new apartments in our West Bayfront, and there was a lot of talk about, well, are there going to be enough parking spaces? And that strikes me as something where you would probably at some point maybe have to look at our code requirements for parking. It just seems to me that this is going to touch a lot of areas. So I'm really excited about your presentation because it was so detailed and you have the context about the other cities and why we're doing this. I also think it would be important, and maybe Renee can help me out on this. It strikes me that this can also relieve some of the budget pressure elsewhere, because this money, I mean, you couldn't have this fee and then say, okay, now we're going to use part of it for some other line item in the budget, correct? I mean,
Correct.
and because we have to make those investments, I think that this would help stabilize some of our other finances. And I believe that this is probably one of the reasons that our own financial consultants had recommended this. So maybe it's not a question, it's just more like, this is a huge project. So how are we, is there a more refined timeline on where we want to get to with this? Are we hoping to implement this for what's 2022? Does anybody in the administration know? There's so much here to digest, but I think that this presentation was amazing. Oh, one other example, which somebody had texted to me while we were going through the presentation, is, if you'll remember, City Council passed a native lawn ordinance to try and get ahead on environmental issues, but there was pushback on that. Oh, people are going to have weeds growing all over. It seems to me we need to take advantage of this as a tremendous educational opportunity, rather than like, oh my God, they're sticking it to us again, we're going to have to pay fees. So anyhow, good presentation. And
Thank you.
Thanks to Kathy and Renee, whoever, brought the wood firm in. That was really well done. Thanks.
Are there any other questions?
Yes, I do have one. I don't know if it would be more of our local officials to answer that, or like some of the properties on the bayfront, it's called they're permitted to have a direct release, so it doesn't go through the stormwater system. They have a direct release from whatever entity or business they have down there. How would that fit in to this? Is that theirs wouldn't have the same set safety as, say, what we're trying to implement?
My initial reaction, this is Elizabeth, is that sounds like consideration under the credit side of this, realizing again, everyone is being asked to help pay for all the needs, and where there is a recognized difference in demand, it fits into a credit standard. So that's off the top of my head reacting, but that certainly would be a point of discussion that we would have with staff.
Yeah, and I appreciate the answer. I just, if they already paid to have a permit to have this done, I don't know if, unless they want to be a good neighbor and help support this with us, then we'd see if that would happen. It doesn't mean they would have to, I guess. I don't know how that would actually work. Mainly down on the bayfront itself, a few of the entities, or maybe the majority of the entities down there.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tread. You gave us a basic 101. As a student, that was a lot of information to take in. So my brain is on overload right now. I'm going to need a retake sometime. We're going to have to have another study session on this because it was so much to take in. And right now, I'm just really overwhelmed about everything because I didn't know too much on this subject. But you were an excellent teacher. And because of the papers in front of us now too, we'll be able to go through it. I have so many questions in so many areas. Liz definitely addressed what was on my mind right away because like last night, I told my husband I had this study session and I run everything through him, and that was just like automatically his, oh, they're going to charge us now, and, I don't want to be charged, and he was like going on, and, you're presenting today, your presentation was excellent, so this is a national thing, and we're definitely going to need to do this, but we definitely need to educate so we don't have a bunch of angry homeowners and business owners. And I realize our infrastructure is ancient here in Erie, Pennsylvania. So hopefully some of that federal money coming in will be appropriated to fixing our infrastructure, and but definitely needed, definitely need to have more study sessions, though. Thank you so much.
I had a question. I don't know if it's probably better for someone from the city to answer this, I'm guessing. But are most of our issues residential, industrial, or business clients, or are there issues across the board? Across the board. Okay, there's no one. Because I know, there's many, residential. I know the question's always with, in the city, do you have to go directly into the system? And a lot of people have splash blocks, that type of thing. But I'm sure that's probably the lesser of some of the issues out there. And I know the question about, I know Dave brought this up earlier, about the sanitary and storm combined. Is there any future plan to continue to separate those, or is it just project by project as you go through? Because, of course, everything existing is going to remain.
No, we're not really having any projects to separate them, because the stormwater actually gets treated down at the treatment plant when it comes in.
Yeah.
And it was designed that way to take in, we used to have over 70 overflows, combined sewer overflows. Now we're down to 3. And so we built the overflow retention center down there, and everything gets treated and chloridated before it goes out. So it's actually better for the waters to have the combined sewer system.
Oh, it's not.
It helps more. So, ultimately, maybe in the future, we may have to treat at the end of the pipe on the stormwater, and that's going to be a large cost. But that may be years down the road. So as much as the combined sewer that we've kept is going to help us defray costs in the future.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Dave, when do you want this implemented? Like, do you have a timeline for this?
For this, we're just early stages. It's just exploratory right now. We've got Wood and Elizabeth's team have done a lot of the work on this up to now to get to this point. Now it's to the point of presenting it to you, and like you said, Kathy, it's a lot of information, and it's going to require a lot more education of council, and then out in the community, because, like you said, to change it from, a knee-jerk reaction to, another fee, to exactly why you need it is going to take some time.
You gentlemen in front of us are the pillars of starting this out. Are you ready for this? I mean, we're going to definitely need to hire more people, right?
We're in the permit right now. We have a permit, and right now we're struggling to meet the requirements of the permit with the personnel that we have right now. And so, yeah, it's whether we like it or not, the DEP is we're in the permit process. So for us, what we need something to go pretty soon.
Right. Thank you. we definitely need to comply with the DEP. So the more educated we get the public and ourselves, like I might not pass the test right now if you gave me a test, but if I study, I'll try. Thank you.
No, public usually doesn't speak at study sessions.
But Mr. Kissel, you're more than happy to take an email or something from you, but the rules of study session have always been mainly with council or the people presenting study session. There hasn't been ever public comment during study sessions. I'll be honest with you, in my years, of course, I'm not the acting president here this evening, but in my years on council, study sessions were strictly with council members and the said authorities that were presenting something to council. But well, if it's a public hearing, I don't.
At a
It can
public
be a
hearing,
public
you
meeting
would-
and a public hearing or two.
At both a public hearing and a public meeting. At a public hearing and a public meeting, you would be able to speak. Traditionally, at our study sessions, the only people who speak are the presenters, and the council fields questions, and it's just for an informational purpose.
Do we have Attorney Betza with us still?
Well, it's permissible. So we will give the two people in-house 3 minutes each to address council.
My name is Ed Kissel, 2815 Sigsbee Street. I'm speaking as Ed Kissel. This has been going on for a number of years on the stormwater. And if you followed it throughout the years, the city has done a lot to try to curtail the stormwater entering Presque Isle Bay in a rushed manner. They put a 6 million gallon retention basin in down at the treatment plant to take the excess stormwater during heavy storm events. Businesses along the bayfront, I'll start with 8th and the Bayfront Country Fair, when they went in 92, that hard surface was addressed by putting in devices in some of their catch basins to slow down the sediment, the oils and greases from entering Cascade Creek. A lot of people don't know they have three about 250-foot tubes underground, about 36 inches in diameter. So their runoff that comes off of that hard surface goes through a snout system, which is something I could explain to you. It just separates the oil and greases. It allows the sediment to settle in the basin and the cleaner water to be vacuumed into these storage tanks. And as they accumulate and more water comes in, it starts to run off in a slower manner instead of having all that come in. The Sheraton, the Hampton, Scott's New Hotel, the Port Authority, the Convention Center all have snouts in not most of them, but in their system of storm drainage to have cleaner water go into the bay. So it's something that the city has done. Now, we tried to get in a ordinance on stormwater versus a regulation that in the engineering department, they give you a piece of paper telling you developers what to do when they do their developments within the city where there's large amounts of stormwater. There's a large snout system up on 505 and East 38th Street by the zoo that was put in to catch the oils and greases going into the Mill Creek conveyance into the bay. So the city has done a lot, but there's help. The county government planning has a person hired for stormwater management. The Soil and Conservation Office up on Wager Road and Route 8 have people that work on that. The DEP has people. So there is help out there, but my question would be, because it's already hit the fan, what kind of administration cost would be associated with forming, be it an authority or an ordinance to administer this particular program? And there's other questions, but I thank you for your time and consideration.
You bring up very valid points, Mr. Kissel. Look forward to discussing further with you.
My name's Freda Tepfer. I live at 1738 West 23rd Street. I'm a soil scientist with extensive experience in water quality, stormwater, pollution prevention, and stormwater education. So if you treat all residential properties in the same tier the same, there's no incentive how people manage their property. There are people on my street who have paved over most of their yard. And I don't know if they're just doing it and nobody's regulating it, but we have maybe the same size lot, but they're not doing nearly as much as I am to reduce my stormwater footprint. I do a lot. I've installed 4 rain barrels. I've routed the water so it doesn't go out in the street, which most of the houses in the city, a lot of older houses do that. And I have a complex vegetation system. Another point is that all non-impervious surface is not created equal. We have vast areas of grass on commercial, government, church, residential properties. Those vast areas of grass do not intercept and infiltrate stormwater to the same degree that more complex vegetation does. There's less impact to the stormwater system from the management inputs for a complex vegetation, especially native vegetation, than extensive lawns and common commercial landscaping. So if you treat all grassed areas the same, if you treat all like-sized residential the same, there's no incentive to do a better job.
You're more than welcome to. Yes,
Well, thank you. Just like to thank the presenters. There's obviously a lot to think about. As acting council president tonight, we also have to think about, the pocketbooks of the city residents. And so we have to weigh the most effective way to get revenue against the hardship against our residents and our homeowners and our property owners. And we just like to thank you for the information.
I do have one more question. Did Elizabeth address a multi-community program?
Developments.
Right. Could we join with our surrounding municipalities? Are we doing this countywide?
This is not being done countywide, but the county is very much engaged in this effort by both the city and Mill Creek, two primary significant players in the process, and both of the city and Mill Creek are looking at the issues of costs and how they can manage their stormwater programs.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Any other questions from council?
I think, Dave, if I could ask you another question, Mr. Mulvihill? Naturally, Mr. Kissel had mentioned that the city has invested in different filtrations. I can't remember the exact term he called where it separated the water and some of the debris. Now, according to Ms. Tread, EPA's standards have gone up where it makes it harder to filter the water that's stormwater. With what we have done in the past, are we still ahead, or is it our infrastructure as a whole? Not what's going in the sewer, what it's getting while it's in the sewer is what our problem is more so, or?
Our problem is quantity as well as, but what we're addressing here a lot is the sediment that's getting in. It's what's getting into the sewer from the neighborhoods on the streets. You know, every time it rains, all the debris gets washed into the storm sewer. And what they're doing is the tolerance, you know, at one point, they weren't even requiring us to address that. Now, the last permit, we have to reduce the amount that we're putting in. We have to demonstrate that we're reducing the amount of sediments or solids that we're allowing to go in the water. So it's done that way. So that we have to take best management practices, street sweeping, stream bank restoration, things like that, things that reduce the amount of sediments that can get into the street or into the streams and then get into the bay and lake. So that's the approach they're taking with us, is reducing the amounts that are being allowed to go into
And how have we metered that, I guess, in the past?
We didn't. And so what we're doing, there's formulas that are given to us through the permitting process that if you do a certain activity over a certain square footage, it will theoretically reduce the sediment by so much, by this many pounds per acre. And so we're required to reduce first to calculate the whole city, whole area, what we're theoretically putting in the storm sewer, and then reduce that by 10% through certain best management practices.
Which people have to remember, 500 miles
of storm sewer, yes.
One more question while you're there. So would it be true that along with the sediment, which will naturally go into the storm drain, that a reduction in pollution, human pollution, could you give us a couple on how reducing that may affect this or may not affect this?
Human pollution meaning?
That's going into our storm drains. Like if I throw out a piece of paper and the rain comes by and swoops it in and throws it into the storm drain and it goes down.
We're not, we have on certain creeks, Mill Creek, we have, and Cascade Creek, we have booms, stormwater booms. They're stretched across the stream and they catch the debris, and then we come with our trucks and we suck it out with our vacuum trucks. So we have that on a couple of our streams, but these regulations right now, what they're requiring us to do is not directly addressing that, even though it is part of the best stormwater practices that we try to do, but it's not one of the requirements of our permit right now to reduce that by a number-wise, if that makes any sense.
Dave, excuse me, will this help the people who get flooded during severe rainstorms in their basements sometimes that get water?
Well, yes, this indirectly, the MS4 does not, but the stormwater utility it'll provide us with money to do projects like to address, capacity issues, such as, where we have certain intersections on the largest of storms that might flood. This will allow us to build relief sewers to help those areas out, and areas that we have capacity constraints, we can address them. So it will help both, stormwater quality and quantity.
Thank you. On my last walk, right after the storm, this past time that we had a storm, I noticed that there were a lot of bottles and cans and some debris at all of the little sewer catch basin type of things along the street when I was walking.
Yeah, it's all over the city. People just throwing it on the ground with it. And that's just something we deal with daily, so.
Any more questions from council?
Does the administration have anything to say if they're on?
I guess I would just, I couldn't hear everything Dave was saying at the beginning, but I think in addition to the environmental issues, long-term sustainability of our system, maintaining the aging infrastructure, and fixing that for the long term. This was also, of course, a recommendation from PFM as part of our early intervention program as a way to set up a system for the long term that would take care of the stormwater system, just like we have, the refuse enterprise fund and the sewer enterprise fund. We know that everything that's collected from this fee will go to maintaining stormwater. So I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you.
Anyone else on the administration side? Well, then we'll officially conclude this meeting at 7:11.